Hey, what's going on? My name is Jonathan Lee, and today I'm going to teach you how to play worship keys in 2021. I'm so glad you've joined me today to get better at worship keys. I believe that if you go through this video, and most importantly, practice the principles that I'll be teaching, that you will be a better worship keys player. At the end of this video, you should have the foundations necessary to know by heart the 6 most common keys in worship music, to know the major scales of those keys, the chords and inversions, and to know when and how to use chord extensions like sevenths, add nines, add twos, sus2s, and sus4s. I'll be playing everything in this video in the key of C so that we all have an anchor point for what we're learning that can then be transposed into other keys. My suggestion to you is that you take everything you learn in this video and transpose it into the keys of G, D, A, E, and F, along with the key of C. So let's dive right into scales. At the end of this section, you should have the foundations necessary to know by heart the scales of the 6 most common keys in worship, which are C, G, D, A, E, and F. Scales help us as worship keys players to know which notes are the right ones to play and which ones are the wrong ones. So whether we're playing melodies, harmonies, lead lines, chords, whatever, these scales will help us know which notes to play. Almost all of modern Western worship music is built off of the major scale. So let's learn how to build a major scale. The major scale is made up of 7 notes and starts and ends on the same note. So C to C. So we can learn a form to create a major scale, and that form is whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. A whole step is the distance between 2 notes where there is a note in between. So C to D is a whole step because there's a note in between. A half step is the distance between 2 notes when there's no note in between. So E to F is a half step because there's no note in between. You can also call this a major second and a minor second. So we can take the form whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, and apply it to the C major scale. So we'll start on C and go up a whole step, go up another whole step, and go up a half step, go up another whole step, another whole step, another whole step, and a half step. And there we have the C major scale. Now you can take this form and apply it to other scales like the F major scale. So you start on F and go up a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, and half step. It is so important for you to practice these scales with both hands so that you can build up a bit of muscle memory. My suggestion to you is that you start with the keys of C, G, and D, and then once you have those down, to move on to the keys of A, E, and F. So that you have an idea of how to play all of these scales, I will give you an example of each of them now. All right, so in this section, we are going to be taking a look at chords and inversions. And at the end of this section, you should have the foundations necessary to be able to play all of the major and minor chords and all of their inversions in the 6 most common keys in worship music. First of all, let's talk about how to build a chord. In the next 2 sections, we'll be taking the song Gyra by Elevation Worship and Maverick City Music and applying the concepts we learn directly to the song. Basic chords in worship are normally made up of 3 different notes, and they're made by taking the notes of the scale and playing every other note. So for the C major chord, we have a C, then we skip a note, and we play an E, we skip a note, and we play G. So that's the C major chord. This can be applied to all the notes in the C major scale, and then we get different types of chords. So here starting on D, we have D, skip a note, F, skip a note, A. And that is a D minor chord. If we do this with every note in the C major scale, we get the chords that are in the key of C major. So starting on C, we have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. Don't worry about this one, it's almost never used in worship music. Instead, people normally play a G over B. Now all these chords can be played in the way I just played them, or you can play what's called an inversion. So instead of playing the chorus of Gyra like this, I can play it like this. Or like this. So what I just did was I took the notes in the chords and moved them up or down an octave depending on how I wanted it to sound. So instead of playing C, E, G as a C major chord, I can play G, C, E. In many worship songs, you're probably used to hearing the root note of the key, which in this case is C, played at the top of the chord, like this. Once you know this, and you know how the different inversions sound, you'll be much better at hearing and playing songs exactly like the recording. Now the last part of this section on chords and inversions that I need to touch on is what's normally referred to in worship music as chords over chords. For example, C over E. That's playing a C in the right hand with an E in the bass. This is just another way of saying that we're playing an inversion of the chord. So we're really playing a C major chord. It's just that instead of having the root of the chord at the base, C, we'll have either the third or the fifth, E or G. This most often happens with the third and seventh notes of the scale, so in this case, E and B. So instead of playing E minor, we would play C over E. And instead of playing B diminished, we would play G over B. In Gyra, we can see these chords specifically in the bridge. All right, so in this final section, we are going to be taking a look at chord extensions. Now, chord extensions are what's going to really add that special touch to your worship keys. The chord extensions that we will be looking at today are sevenths, add nines, add twos, sus2s, and sus4s. Let's start with sevenths. Sevenths are made by adding another note on top of the three that we normally use to make a chord. So if we have a C major chord, we'll add another note on top following the same pattern of skipping a note. So we'll play C, E, G, and add a B. Now this is called a major 7 chord. There are a bunch of different types of seventh chords in music, but we're just going to talk about 3 types, and those are major, minor, and dominant. Major 7th chords are built off of the 1st and 4th notes of the major key. So in the key of C, that would be C and F. Here we have a C major 7th chord. And here is an F major 7. In a major scale, we have 3 minor 7th chords that we can play that are built off of the 2nd, 3rd, and 6th notes of the scale. In C major, those are D minor 7, E minor 7, and A minor 7. In a major scale, we have one dominant 7 chord, and it's built off of the 5th note of the scale. So in the key of C, that would be G. This is G dominant 7. Most of the time, you'll encounter 7ths in the minor chords of the key you're in, most commonly built off of the 2nd and 6th notes of the scale. So in the key of C, that would be D minor 7 and A minor 7. But you could also encounter the other ones that we looked at. In gyro, we can specifically see the minor 7 chords in the second part of the verse where it does G over B, A minor 7, D minor 7, C, and then again A minor 7, G, D minor 7, C. Next, we have add 9s, add 2s, and sus 2s. These 3 chord extensions are made by adding the note that is above the root of the chord. So if we have an F major chord, we would be adding the note that is above F, which is G. These 3 chord extensions all have the same extended note, but they have different names depending on whether the 3rd is played or not and where the extended note is played. 9ths and add 2s both include the 3rd of the chord, whereas the sus 2 does not. If we play the 3rd of the chord and the note we add is at the top of the chord, then we call this an add 9. But if the note we add is somewhere in the middle of the chord, we call it an add 2. However, if we take that 3rd away, it's called a sus 2. This type of chord is mostly used in chords that are based off of the 1st and 4th notes of the scale. So in this case, C and F, but you can also get some really nice textures by adding them to the minor chords, like the ones that are built off of the 2nd and 6th notes of the scale. Here we have an A minor add 2. And here a D minor add 2. In gyro, we can see how they use add 2s and sus 2s right in the beginning in the intro. The final chord extension we'll be talking about is the sus 4. This chord extension takes the 3rd of the chord and moves it up either a half step or a whole step, depending on where it is in the scale. It's mostly used in the chords built off of the 1st and 5th notes of the major scale. So C sus looks like this, and G sus looks like this. But it can also be done with the minor chords that are built off of the 2nd and 6th notes of the scale. So here is a D minor sus 4. And an A minor sus 4. In gyro, we can see how they use the sus 4 right at the beginning of the verse. All right, there you have it. Those are the basic building blocks of how to play worship keys in 2021. Please do not forget that all of these techniques, all of these principles need to be practiced before you can use them in a live setting. So my suggestion to you would be to take everything that you learned in this video and play them in these 6 most common keys in worship music. If you'd like to see all these techniques in action, stick around for an example of how I use all of them in my own playing. But if not, I'll see you in the next video.